Ja też bardzo dziękuję za dzisiejsze
Ladies and
uczestnictwo.
gentlemen, thank you
Bardzo się
for
cieszę,
inviting me to take part
mogę
in
być
this
dzisiaj z wami wszystkimi. Dla
meeting.
mnie
I'm
to
really happy to join you
szczególna okazja
all.
do rozmowy z
And
polskimi
it's a
gośćmi.
special opportunity
Po
to
raz
discuss
pierwszy
Polish guests for
prezentujemy
the
nasze
first
badania
time,
w Polsce, choć wirtualnie.
because we are presenting our
Badanie, które rozpoczęliśmy w
research or
zeszłym
study
roku w
for
ramach
the first time in
niemieckiej
Poland. It was
prezydencji
started
w
last
Radzie
year
Unii Europejskiej.
during the German
Badanie, które ma
presidency in the European
mamy nadzieję,
Council.
że ma
And as
szczególną
part,
wartość dla
I
polskich
believe
regionów,
this
ale
study
także
carries
dla
special
wielu
value
innych regionów w
for
całej
Polish
Europie.
and other European
Dlatego bardzo się cieszę,
regions.
widząc dziś przedstawicieli nie tylko
I'm
z
really
Polski,
happy to
z
see
Polski, ale także
representatives
z
of
Czech,
not just Polish, but
Rumunii
also
i
Czech,
mojej
Romanian,
rodziny Bułgarii.
and Bulgarian
I teraz, ponieważ
states.
wchodzę w skompleksowane tematy,
These topics
niestety
will
do
be
tego nie
complex,
wystarczy.
so my
Muszę
Polish will not be
kontynuować po
sufficient
angielsku.
to
Jak mówił
discuss
pan
them.
Tusk,
I
że
will switch
musi
to English,
Polish the English
and
dla mnie oznacza Polish the Polish.
I
So on that
will
note,
quote
I'd like to thank also the
Tusk's
interpreters for being so flexible and being able to switch quickly between the languages. I have a presentation to share, so bear with me just a second. I think we have wealth of resources in terms of interesting maps that hopefully will be valuable in the course of the discussion on the development of the just transition plans. So I trust you see the presentation now. Hopefully it is in full mode as I can see it, at least in my case. What I'd like to focus on today is the link between the development of the just transition plans and the structural change potential, or the potential to diversify the economic potential in coal phase out regions, but not only. Obviously, we talk about regions which are dependent on incumbent industries, which are very carbon intensive. But this link that we wish to establish, or in this link that we wish to establish, we wish to focus on 3 of the JTF proposed actions and then amended by the Parliament, which remain the same. 3 actions which we believe are crucial in order to explain the potential or the diversity in potential to induce structural change across the major coal regions across Europe. And these are the first 3 actions which are mentioned by the proposed regulation. First of all, we talk about productive investments in SMEs, investments in the creation of new firms, and investments in research and innovation activities. Now, when we started the research around a year ago, we faced a number of different policy questions, one of which was quite interesting. We knew that at that time, the JTF has been just under discussion in terms of its pecuniary volume. And first discussions were, or estimations were, that it should amount between 30 and 50 billion. And obviously today we see that it's 17.5 billion. And nevertheless, the question remains valid, even more valid now with the current volume of the JTF. There are different estimates about how much the industrial decarbonization will cost the European Union. And there are different estimates using different methodologies, one of which is the Prime's estimation for energy markets, which other scholars say that it's while it is probably accurate, it's probably not close to the reality. Most likely, we are talking about something between 250 and 300 billion per year in order to cover the cost of this transition of the industrial decarbonization. And some are even saying that it will be even significantly more if we take into account the financial input that has been promised by the Paris Agreement. So for the sake of argument, let's say that we may estimate around 300 billion per year. And if you compare that with the JTF resources, which are 70.5 currently and will remain 70.5, well, obviously we talk about a JTF as an instrument rather than a compensation for the entire expenditure that is going to be incurred. It is an important instrument because it can, as you already also know, it can channel investments and open the door for other instruments under the Just Transition Mechanism. And colleagues from the European Investment Bank will probably talk about that in more detail. This makes the Just Transition Fund even more important because it is actually at the exit of certain discussions and at the entrance of access to different financial streams. And so it's even more important to make the Just Transition Fund more efficient. So this is why we say while we believe that every single action proposed under the Just Transition Fund is probably going to have a positive marginal effect on sustainable development as such, we'd like to focus, when we talk about just transition and when we talk about the structural change and the potential to induce it and to diversify the economy, we talk about the first three actions, which I've shown in the previous slide, maybe A, B, and C, because we believe that these are the actions which are most likely to have a positive moderating effect on parameters that explain structural change potential and the big diversity of the structural change potential. Here, let me open a little bracket and digress to say that how we approximate the just transition is to believe or to assume that the just transition is the readjusted potential to induce economic diversification. This is how we conceptualize it here. So the question will be then, it's actually a mix of a policy and a research question. Will be then, so be it, A, B, and C, it's plausible, but how to actually combine this? So intuitively, we will think that if we have such a big impact on what is being imposed by the European Green Deal on our coal regions, then probably we have to take the maximum of everything that is being offered under the JTF. So A, B, and C to the full extent, but appreciate the fact that here our thinking is actually also founded in microeconomic theory, to say that each of these actions will presumably have will be subject to the law of diminishing marginal returns, meaning that every additional euro spent on, let's say, productive investments or R&D will have less and less value than the previous one. Still positive impact and well, overall effect on the potential to induce structural change, but less and less effective than the previous one, which actually makes necessary to think how to combine these different sources, these different actions, in particular the A, B, and C, and to achieve what we call, of course, borrowed from microeconomic theory, the so-called social benefit maximizing intensity. So what is the moment where we probably have to limit our productive investments and invest in incubation and vice versa? The other question that we need to ask ourselves, especially now in the context of development of the just transition plans, is how to legitimize that. Well, of course, we can derive the conclusions of the whereabouts of this social benefit maximizing intensity. We can apply our probability and statistical tools to find this. But at the same time, we also know that this is subject to regional error. And this regional error is actually can be minimized by plugging in also regional knowledge. And this regional knowledge happens to be distributed over many different actors. And this is actually reminiscent of what you probably already know and what you probably also engage with the so-called entrepreneurial discovery process, which is the backbone of the smart specialization strategies. And as you know, the just transition plans are expected to also take into account other territorial plans, climate plans, but also the smart specialization strategies. So it's not too far-fetched to say, well, the entrepreneurial discovery process as a mechanism to assemble this knowledge that is spread over different actors, academia, R&D sector, private R&D sector, and public one, but also the public sector, that this can be well governed by an entrepreneurial discovery process that can be advising us about the whereabouts, precise whereabouts of this social benefit maximizing intensity of the A, B, and C actions of the Just Transition Fund. So which are the regions which are most affected? Let us remind ourselves, this is something that is nothing new to you, obviously. We are using here data from the JRC, which has been updated. Nevertheless, it's still accurate or valid enough. These are the figures, the absolute and relative figures of employment in direct and indirect coal-related activities. With the circles, you will see the absolute figures, and by the sheer diameter of the circle, you see where we have quite significant dependence in terms of employment. Where you also see the more saturated brownish colors, we have also higher level of dependency because we have higher shares of coal-related activities or employment in coal-related activities as part of the total employment. The JRC has made also some estimates, which we have mapped here based on different scenarios, in particular different scenarios for the phase out by 2025 and 2030. And again, these scenarios have been mapped here with the different brownish, yellowish colors. So the more saturated the color, the more brownish it is, the more the higher the share of estimated job losses by 2030. And you see again here by the sheer diameter of the circle in absolute terms, where the biggest risk, or not risk, but the biggest challenge of job losses is being plotted. We talk about the Wywodzicz of Śląskie and Małopolskie. We talk about Morawsko-Śleskie and Karlovy Vary, the Lausitz, North Rhine-Westphalia, all the way to Giro Valley and the provinces of Stara Zagora and Sliven. Now, when I was talking about how these A, B, and C actions, the investments in R&D, that you are probably now also scrutinizing and looking into when you develop the just transition plans, the investments in the productive investments, but also the investments in incubation activities, how these activities are moderating two crucial parameters that we believe are best explaining the potential to diversify the economic potential. We have looked into different pieces of evidence from ESPON in order to approximate these parameters of R&D and entrepreneurial dynamics. Let me start with the latter, with the entrepreneurial dynamics, where we look into the enterprise birth rates, for instance, where we look into enterprise death rates, enterprise survival rates. What I'm showing here are the birth rates. In 2014, you see the more saturated the bluish color, the more the higher the percentage of new emerging firms as a share of all active enterprises in that region, and you immediately will see that we have differences here when we look into the major coal regions, North Rhine-Westphalia, the Lausitz, Śląskie, Małopolskie, the Czech regions of Karlovy Vary, Ustinov, Labem, Morawsko-Śleskie, all the way again to Giro Valley and Stara Zagora. We have different potential, obviously, and we have different extremes in let's say in the both tails of a normal distribution, which is interesting to observe, and this is what we are going to observe in the other parameters as well, because this actually means that while these regions are accessing the same instruments, the same actions, they have quite different potential to necessitated for the transition to induce the necessary diversification of the incumbent or dependency on incumbent industries. When we approximate the knowledge stock or the R&D stock, one way to look into that is, this is a different piece of evidence from ESPON, is to look into the potential for knowledge economy. This potential has been clustered or approximated via different indicators, like for instance, the intramural R&D expenditure, like the share of tertiary educated people, like the share of people employed in science and technology as part of total employment, number of patents, you name it, many different standard indicators which are used to define the innovation potential of regions. And you see that based on this clustering, we will yield 4 different types of regions. And again, if you look at where the major coal regions are, they are striped here. Again, we will realize that we have major differences, major variance in terms of the potential for knowledge economy. We have on the top of the legend, you will see the highly competitive ones, while at the bottom we have the less competitive ones with very low incidence, so-called knowledge economy. And again, here we see the major coal regions from Województwo Śląskie, Karlovy Vary, Ustinov, Labem, Morawsko-Śleskie, the Giro Valley and Stara Zagora are also in this cluster, whereas we have the Lausitz and even a very highly competitive, the districts of Düsseldorf and Cologne, where we have the Rhine mining areas. Another very interesting parameter, this is the foreign direct investment. Why foreign direct investment? Well, when we talk about the R&D stock, we talk about different flows of knowledge, and these different flows can stem or can emanate either within the region or can be imported into the regions. And here we argue that some knowledge, technological knowledge, is being imported with FDI. These are the principles of this is the interpretation of the positive externalities of foreign direct investment. And this is, I appreciate, it's a complex map to read, but I'd like to point at a few aspects. Again, the circles are pointing at the absolute figures in terms of billion euros spent from extra European foreign direct investment, invested from outside Europe in these regions. And in the brownish saturated colors, the more saturated the color, the higher the dependency, one may argue, or the higher the percentage of such investments as part of the regional GDP between 2003 and 2015, aggregated. So this is very interesting to observe, because we may argue that the higher the dependency on non-local knowledge is. Remember when I said we need to determine the social benefit maximizing quantity of certain actions under the A, B, and C. So this will be very interesting signal for us to understand that maybe the imported knowledge, the imported technological knowledge is something that we need to probably emphasize on. One very interesting aspect here, in addition to the brownish colors, are the green colors. You see them quite preponderance in the Central and Eastern European regions. So this is basically, we distinguish in terms of foreign direct investment between the greenfield investments and mergers and acquisitions. Greenfield investments are investments from scratch. So basically, we may assume that the more greenfield investments we have, the higher the potential to import knowledge, which again is an additional signal for us to maybe these regions which exhibit here a lot of green dots. Maybe these regions actually did not have sufficient levels of R&D stock that is being appropriated by foreign investors. But maybe it's the contrary that happens. Maybe we're importing knowledge, and this is quite interesting again to determine the so-called social benefit maximizing intensity of the A, B, and C actions, looking at the potential to engage in open innovation and, as the regulation actually defines it, the transfer of advanced technologies from foreign direct investment to other firms, local firms in the region. That's another piece of ESPON research where we have been looking into two aspects, into two technological aspects. The level of advancement in the so-called 3.0 technology and 4.0 technology. 3.0 technologies are the ones as defined by Eurostat that one may say are determining the level of civilization we have attained in the second half of last century. So we talk about ICT, we talk about semiconductors, we talk about chemistry and so on and so forth, whereas 4.0, as you know, here we talk about cyber-physical systems, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So we've been looking into the number of patents originating from certain regions, in that case from NUTS 2 level, in both domains, in the domain of 3.0 technologies and 4.0 technologies. 3.0 within the first decade of 21st century, and 4.0 from 2010 to 2015. And so there are different scenarios when one is comparing between the different levels of development from 3.0 to 4.0. One of the scenario is the leapfrogging. So regions which have not been very advanced previously in 3.0 technologies are now being defined as potential or estimated to have a large potential to leapfrog and to be leaders in 4.0 technologies. And you see, quite interestingly, we see Malopolsky, we see Karlovy Vary Justinat Lab, and we see Moravsko-Šlezsky in this domain. So again, another interesting piece of information for us when determining the strategies in the just transition plans. We've also looked now in a way to triangulate our findings with the Innovation Performance Index from the European Commission, and you see the pattern is probably similar. In many cases in Central and Eastern Europe, we have a rather low innovation performance. You see the yellowish and pinkish colors, whereas in the Lausitz and in particular in Nordrhein-Westfalen in Germany, we tend to have strong innovation performance and also the leaders. Now, why is this important? Why is this analysis important? We've tried to plot this now, of course, only for the major core regions. looking into the two trajectories, the entrepreneurial and the knowledge stock development. And you see that indeed, as I mentioned before, there are very different levels of potential of coal phase-out regions. Looking, for instance, at the lower left corner where we have Voivodship Śląskie, and the upper right corner where we have the governmental districts of Cologne and Düsseldorf. So basically, again, two extremes in the two tails of a normal distribution, one may say, both having same access to the same, similar access to the same JTF actions, but probably we will have to design our just transition plans differently in order to account for this difference in the potential to induce structural change. And what we derive from this, and I think this is actually my major advice and message for today's presentation, is when we develop the just transition plans, we look into two major trajectories. This is the entrepreneurial stock, the entrepreneurial dynamics, and the R&D, the knowledge stock. And here we plotted the different actions listed in the regulation, like R&D investments and transfer of advanced technologies, or business incubation versus productive investments. Remember when I said that these actions are probably subject to the law of diminishing marginal returns, meaning that every additional euro we spend on business incubation probably have the less and less effect on our economy, because we also lose euros that we spent on business incubation that we would have spent on productive investments, and vice versa. The same applies also for the knowledge stock. The investment in one additional lab may be actually less valuable than investing or channeling resources to open innovation. So finding the right whereabouts of the respective region on that slope, obviously this is just conceptual, so it's not a slope from which we can derive, of course, a concrete coefficient of a certain pace of development, but this can help us to find the whereabouts of this let's say most adequate intensity of different actions, because obviously they're complementary. And we also say that, of course, while we can use our statistical and probabilistic tools, we miss an important component, which, as I said before, is probably spread in the memory of the regions. And this is something that is, again, reminiscent of the entrepreneurial discovery process. So we argue that the entrepreneurial discovery process is the best mechanism for you to engage with different actors and define these whereabouts of where the social benefit intensity, maximizing benefit intensity will be, and so what we also will suggest is that this is also the best mechanism to implement the just transition plans, not only to design them. This is in a nutshell what I wanted to share from our research, but let me also refer to something quite interesting also in the context of we now talk to a lot of policy stakeholders. We've had the privilege to present this research last autumn to one of the key figures behind another major transition of Poland in the late 1980s, early 1990s, Jeffrey Sachs, who was one of the masterminds of the Balcerowicz plan. And we asked him, you may also associate it with something that is referred to as the shock therapy, which is not a coined term by himself, but we asked him the question as to whether the European Green Deal is kind of the new green shock therapy for Europe. And what he said was quite interesting. So he answered with the same degree of confidence, or even more confident, that he believes that the regions, of course referring to the coal regions, are more than well equipped to master transition. And I guess that he was not only referring to what I was presenting here in terms of the potential for entrepreneurial dynamics, and the knowledge stock, but he was probably referring to the memory that we have in these regions, having gone through major transitions already in the past. So on that cheerful note, I'd like to end the presentation as such, but I'm certainly happy to engage in the further discussion, and I look forward to the exchange with you. Thank you very much.